Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen. This is Leonard from the Ultimate Growth Experience podcast. Today, I am joined by my great friend, Fale Andrew Lesa. He is a current New Zealand diplomat, a vice chairman at Manurewa High School, former Manukau City Councillor, and a University of Auckland alumni. Good to be with you, mate.
Thank you very much for having me, Leo. It's good to be here.
Excellent. So now, you are my very first working professional on my show. How do you feel?
Terrifying. I mean, most people our age are now working in the informal job market on things like temporary contracts and unpaid internships. We change employers almost as often as we update our DPs. And I happen to believe in routine because it builds resilience and fosters consistency. It also validates what you bring to the table every day. A well-oiled machine requires investing in quality relationships with your fellow colleagues, and you can only get that by working with employers over a long course of time. So it's quite sad and scary to think that most people our age are now working in silos and across different multiple employers over a short space of time. I think that's very, very scary.
That's the consequence of globalization.
It is the open source
That's
economy
right.
and all the flexibility that comes with it. But, you know, I've always been a traditionalist. I was raised by my grandparents, and so the 9 to 5 loyalty to your employer has been a big part of my values growing up. So I feel like, working for the same employer for a long time is where I need to be.
And you're still there at the moment,
I'm
obviously.
still loyal there. Yeah,
Indeed.
absolutely. Yes.
Indeed. That's awesome, man.
Thanks, man.
Nah, no problem. So I heard you've been working very hard to improve yourself in the past couple of months. So I know that I've helped you in a way in terms of getting your health in check relatively sorted
Absolutely.
out.
Yes.
And I'm very happy about this. So let my audience know, what have you been up to?
It's actually a lot longer than that. So 2 years ago, I was a whopping 130 kgs.
My goodness.
And today I'm only 99. So slow and steady wins the race. I didn't join any gyms. And there was no radical diets. There were small changes to exercise and food. That's what made all the difference, and I feel great. I didn't have to pay, all this money for gym memberships or diets or anything like that. So I did it the old school way, and I'm very proud of that because a lot of people like to complicate the process of weight loss and getting into shape. But if you go back to the roots, it's simply a combination of exercise and diet changes, and so it's a very simple formula to lose weight and to feel great. And I'm very proud that I didn't have to go down the Western route of diets and gym memberships.
The Samoans are coming out.
I'm very frugal. A lot of people know that about me. So when it comes to saving money, I find as many loopholes as I can.
Oh my goodness.
Money's time, bro. Time is money.
And discipline.
Exactly. So discipline has been a big part of that shift as well. Once I start something, I've always been very careful to follow through because you don't want to start something with the intention of doing it and stopping halfway. So when I embarked on the journey 2 years ago, I was very, very adamant that I needed to reinvent myself before I go off into these embassies and multilateral spaces. Right. I need to look my best because at the end of the day, I'm representing New Zealand. And I can't do that if I'm overweight and if I don't like who I see in the mirror. I need to put my best foot forward for the country and for the values that this country has. And I need to be able to feel good about myself as well. So those were the conversations that I had internally that helped convince me that this was who I needed to be and these were the sacrifices that I needed to make. So I had to say goodbye to the chocolate cake and hello to the salads.
So in terms of
I have never
yourself,
looked back. Yeah.
In terms of reinventing yourself, does that not only apply to weight loss, but also other aspects of your life?
Absolutely. So it has been a massive journey, and not just in weight loss, but also in my relationships. So I've had to reconsider friendships. I've had to reconsider the way that I interact with my relatives. There's been a whole shift in the way that I approach life. Even I'm starting to spend more money now. So, some of the ideas that I used to have before this journey 2 years ago have suddenly evolved. And I feel like I am very much a new person because of that shift in my mindset. And I feel amazing. And people on the street are starting to notice as well. So.
That's always a good sign. Always
Exactly.
a fantastic good sign.
It is, yes.
Jeez. So as a diplomat, I've noticed that you get access to basically the most successful people around the world and the globe. So how do you, as an individual, as a diplomat, network with people?
A very good question indeed, Leo. So my signature feature is my smile, because I like to laugh. And I think in diplomacy that can be very useful. We need to break down barriers quickly, and authenticity can make all the difference. Our counterparts relax when you crack a joke or two, and that has enormous value in heated negotiations. Humor transcends all languages and cultures. Most of my networking is online now. I'm not going to lie, I'm a millennial, but there is no substitute for old school meetups. Given my heavy travel schedule, I try to meet with as many colleagues across the globe to keep those connections alive. I also host my colleagues whenever they come to New Zealand, so it's a give and take, really. Yeah.
Because you've met people like Ban Ki-moon and Bill Clinton and other people. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, this is a gentleman that knows how to network. Basically, killing
Definitely.
With the advice given by people like Dale Carnegie and all those people. Network.
Yes, and another aspect to that is what I wear. So most people are wearing suits, but I choose to go in sometimes with exotic Eastern costumes. And what it does is that it makes you stand out. And in a crowd where everybody looks exactly the same in their Italian suits and leather shoes, if you're coming into those spaces with an exotic costume from the Eastern world, you stand out and people remember you. And in diplomacy, when people remember you, that's very, very effective as well. You need to be able to leave an impact on people like Bill Clinton and Ban Ki-moon.
Yes.
So,
speaking of that, I mean, everybody knows that I'm a Korean Kiwi, and so in Korea, did you wear hanbok?
Unfortunately, they didn't come in my size back then, so I was 110 kgs the last time I was in Korea, and I don't think that my size was in stock, so unfortunately I couldn't wear anything in Northeast Asia. But if I go back now, maybe they will have my size.
So that's a consideration to get still thinking about. That's fantastic, Fale. So as a diplomat, can you please give us maybe a 10-minute take on of your views on foreign policy at the moment? So everybody's talking about Trump, everybody's talking about, oh my goodness, this is a period of chaos, unpredictability.
Yes.
What's your take on that?
It's an interesting one. I think it's important for New Zealand to preserve our independent foreign policy, especially in light of China's rapid ascent and what some might say is a noticeable decline in Western Europe and North America.
Yes.
Our credibility is associated with our pragmatism. It is imperative that we protect what makes New Zealand so unique on the global stage. We can also help China by modeling those proud democratic values and principles. We do have a New Zealander in the Trump administration, by the way. He's number 7 in the hierarchy, so he's very, very senior. And I think New Zealand already leverages that connection so that we have, I don't know if you saw recently, but there were changes to the visa system for Kiwis traveling to the United States. And apparently that man was responsible by whispering into the ear of Donald Trump.
What's his name?
I don't remember. This is terrible. No, but he was a very successful CEO in the private sector before Trump. I know he's the Vice Secretary of Trade and Economics.
Fantastic.
He holds a very senior post in that administration.
Jesus.
And historically, we haven't had a very good relationship with the United States. So to have a Kiwi in a post like that inside the White House administration is very useful for our interests in that part of the world.
It's because of the the David Lange time, right? Based on the nuclear
absolutely
challenge and
so we were expelled
from
from the alliance, the ANZUS alliance between the United States, Australia and New Zealand. And I guess as a result of that, we were forced to gravitate towards China and towards other partners in the region. And we've done very well for ourselves because of that pragmatism. We were able to foresee, the rise of China and be able to benefit from their success. We currently provide more than half of China's dairy imports alone. And when you think about the size of New Zealand and the size of the Chinese market, that is an incredible responsibility. And so, the leadership crisis in Fonterra right now, I don't know if you've heard, is very detrimental. So they've had a number of massive changes to their executive leadership, and that's scaring some of the investors. Their share value has plummeted. And China will be looking at that and saying, is New Zealand still a reliable export market? Or will we have to turn to Australia? And so we need to be having some of those frank conversations about the nature of our dairy market and our industry, our agriculture industry, to ensure that we're always competitive and that we don't have too much scandals to scare our partners with.
So on that point, are you telling me that is this problem in Fonterra based around governmental failure, or is it based around the hierarchical failure of Fonterra
Look, as a
itself?
public servant, I'm not at liberty to say much about this. I don't even know if I was allowed to raise that initially. But what I will say, is that they're currently searching for a new CEO. It's a global search. They're trying to get as much global talent as they can. But they also had a change on the board with the chairman as well. So it's very unusual to have a change of chairman and CEO at the exact same time. So that's scaring investors because it comes on the back of a very poor performance from Fonterra lately. And I don't know if you've heard of the other dairy company. It's called
Which one?
It's it's actually bigger than Fonterra now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought Fonterra was the number one in the world.
No. It's so this one is now bigger in value. I can't remember the name, but I'm sure it's.
Oh, we can look into.
We
that
can
later.
we can get to that later, but
Later
it's
on.
currently the biggest.
Oh, interesting. So, as you know, Fale,
Yes.
I'm a big reader of books, non-fiction books about foreign policy as well.
Yes.
And I finished a book by Professor Henry Kissinger
Of
about
course.
world order, as to how the Westphalian system, the history of the rise of the United States as a superpower. But also, I'd like to ask you in terms of, you talked about how New Zealand needs to continue to conduct an independent foreign policy.
Of course.
But what else
Yep.
should we do besides the exports and the in terms of, I mean, a global cooperation? Like, what is your individual take?
Of course. Well, it's exciting now because New Zealand is increasingly a superpower when it comes to space exploration. And we're one of the few countries that have actually sent a rocket into space. And that's an example of how competitive we can be in these emerging industries like technology, space exploration, even, the green revolution, for example. We're leading the way on renewable energy.
Which is brilliant.
Exactly. We need to move beyond the traditional industries of agriculture and tourism because they're no longer as relevant beyond the 21st century. So we need to be having those conversations about where to next, and we don't actually have a very strong startup sector in New Zealand, and we could be the Singapore of the Pacific if we play our cards right. We need to be ensuring that young people have access to the capital to set these ideas off the ground, because at the moment young entrepreneurs just don't have the money to get ideas off the ground. And if the government can be proactive in that sense and kind of foster a new startup scene in New Zealand, it could be very, very successful.
So that your point is essentially that at the moment a lot of millennials and a lot of young entrepreneurs are going overseas and
Exactly.
being part of the brain drain.
Absolutely.
syndrome, right?
I don't know if you saw the shoes that Jacinda Ardern was wearing recently. They were made entirely of wool by a New Zealand firm now in Los Angeles.
That is-
And they're making millions of dollars. But he actually had to move to Los Angeles to get that idea off the ground. And that to me tells us that we're not doing enough to keep those people in New Zealand by giving them the capital to get those things started.
And that's up to
So-
the public policy analysts and the academics and the people in the business sector to cooperate there.
Absolutely.
But now, the main point of my podcast is talk about self-improvement, but
Yes.
it's totally fine. And plus, I'm sure our listeners are more than interested about foreign policy. So, ladies
I
and
hope so,
gentlemen,
yes.
if you're interested in reading the book that I read, the title is World Order by Dr. Henry Kissinger of Harvard University. So, to the next question.
Before we move on, can I
yes.
give you an interesting fact?
Sure. Well,
So-
what interesting.
Henry Kissinger was offered the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in Vietnam, but unfortunately he didn't go to the ceremony. He
why is that?
boycotted it because he didn't think he deserved it. And a few months later, the truce that they signed, that truce was broken and the communists invaded South Vietnam. So he was heavily criticized.
Yes.
And 2 people on the Nobel Committee resigned in protest because they didn't think he was deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize. And so he donated his money to charity. He didn't go to the award ceremony. And
Wow.
he even tried to give it back and the Nobel Peace Prize Committee wouldn't allow him to do that. So that's a stark contrast to Barack Obama, who was awarded his Nobel Peace Prize, did very little for it, and yet refused to give it up, and even went to the ceremony to receive it in person. So
let's move away from politics.
So Henry Kissinger was obviously very noble and very modest as well.
Fair enough. Interesting view.
Yes.
So, back to your life.
Yes.
Did you have a really low point? As in, you're at the moment, we all know how well you're doing.
Of course.
Your academic credentials are excellent.
Thank you.
You're currently doing a fantastic job as a diplomat.
Thank you very much.
You're my good friend, and your life in general is getting better. But
yes.
What would you say was the lowest point that you faced, and how did you overcome that adversity?
Of course. I guess the lowest point for me would have been during puberty. So I was always an overweight teenager, and in a school as big as, the schools in South Auckland, you stand out, and people ridicule you. You don't feel very good about yourself. I was bullied a lot. I didn't feel, all that great. There was overcrowding at home. I was living with my grandparents at the time. Some relatives had just come over from Samoa. We were hosting them as well. So, this was a very stressful period in my life, and my grades were falling. I didn't have a lot going for me. And it wasn't until I found charity through the local youth council that I started to feel valid and started to feel like I could actually make a difference. And that's the value of voluntary experience at an early age. It really does. I mean, for me, it was therapy because I was on the verge of total despair. I felt like shit, to be honest. And had I not stumbled into the voluntary sector at the time, I would have been very unhappy. And I'm very grateful for those catalysts. Sometimes it's a very small spark that can change your entire destiny. And for me, it was voluntary service.
Is that how you met our good friend Amar Jaku as well?
Yes, exactly. So Amar and I go way back.
If you're listening to this, Amar, we reference you, mate.
He's a good guy.
Indeed. So that's actually a tragic and sad story, mate. Because as you know, Fale, as a young Asian man myself, I was quite bullied as a year 10, year 11. I was quite overweight myself. I stood out in my year 3 photos as well.
Wow.
And so for me, I started getting into the gym in Form 6 and really pushing myself. And now here we are running this amazing
The rest
podcast.
is history.
That's
exactly.
right. And so you've overcome all those adversities, and so if you could talk to, or not talk to, but if any of people in your communities are listening to this, what would you tell a young 12-year-old Fale at the time of what he could be doing in facing those adversities?
That's a big question, man. Where would I start? I mean, I guess for me it would just be to not to take life so seriously at that age. You often think that popularity in high school is your universe, and you do things that you're not very proud of many years later because you thought it would make you cool or make you fashionable. So there were so many choices back then that were made in a very dark space, and that led to me being very it felt like I wasn't being authentic to myself and to the values that I hold dearly. And I would tell my 12-year-old self that that it's not the end of the world if you're not popular, if you're not, if you don't have a six-pack, if you're not getting all the girls, because life goes on. And in hindsight, I now have all of those things. And so it wasn't the end of the world, essentially. And so make the most of your childhood, because those are the best years of your life. So I would tell my 12-year-old to just enjoy the moment and go out of your comfort zone, because that's where a lot of the changes occur.
Get outside the comfort zone.
Take
volunteer.
more risks.
Right.
Absolutely, yes.
And Fale, I'm quite saddened by the state of how the education system, but not only that, our kids are told, don't take risks, don't do anything that's uncomfortable. And
of course.
I brought you in because, I know a lot of people in South Auckland and other areas where they don't have an identity. And I really care about the way in which, I want them to succeed. I want to see more kids become... whatever they want to be, a doctor, a lawyer, or engineer, or an entrepreneur, whatever they want to be.
Of course.
And so, it's quite tragic at the moment, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And in South Auckland, we've been very, very good at tailoring the education system to the skills and qualities of Māori and Pacific Island learners. So at Manurewa High School, for example, we set up the first trades academy in the country.
Wow.
We partnered with Microsoft to get some of the latest technology into the school because we knew that Māori and Pacific Island learners work better with their hands. They work better by doing things. And you can't measure the success of an elephant by its ability to swim.
Yes.
So you need to, tailor education to your audience, and we've done that, and we've already seen improvements in Māori and Pacific student achievement as a result of that.
That's phenomenal.
So we cannot allow national curriculum standards to dictate how students in South Auckland learn, because students in South Auckland are very practical, and they rely on things like their heritage as well. So we've tried to introduce a lot of Pacific history, Māori history, tattooing into the school curriculum so that students can identify with their lessons, with their curriculum. And there's a debate that rages right now about whether we should introduce the Māori land wars into the history curriculum, because we currently learn about Tudor Stuart and the appropriate dynasties. In the monarchy in Britain is no longer relevant, and arguably never has been very relevant to people in the South Pacific. So we're trying to make our curriculum more relevant to our region. And I think that's very important.
So in the education system, like what I want is equality of opportunity.
Of
I want
course.
every single individual in New Zealand to be able to find happiness, find success, and so that's a good advice.
Thank you
to the
very much.
12-year-old. Yeah, indeed, Fale. So at the moment, you're doing quite well.
Yes.
You're 25. You have great friends like myself. What are your individual aspirations? Is there a particular goal set? I mean, what would you yourself say that you would want?
I mean, there are a series of pathways or goals. I'm not the kind of person that sets out to do one or two things. I've kept an open mind, and I have a compass ahead of me, and I intend to just put one foot ahead of the other and go wherever the wind takes me. As cliche as that sounds, I do want to stay in diplomacy for as long as possible. Ideally, as a leader in the UN system at some stage, as a senior executive for one of the multilateral organizations.
Like NATO,
the OECD, the
ASEAN,
Commonwealth. There's quite a few of them already out there. And the thing with diplomacy is if you do the same thing for too long, you start losing your value. So it's important to mix up your workload so that you build even more networks and more skills and insights as well. So, the International Criminal Court is another. There are so many possibilities out there, and I don't believe that you should narrow your future at such a young age. I think you should just, allow for anything to happen. And that's what I've done, what I will continue to do as well.
So if I sum it up, being open-minded.
Yes.
Being ambitious.
Yes.
Constantly facing adversities.
Absolutely.
And front-loading your pain.
Perfect.
Incredible. That is fantastic, Fale. Fantastic. I'm sure my audience will be very happy about listening to your story as well. So, do you have a social media account or somewhere where my followers can follow you?
I certainly do. So
you
if they look for my name on Facebook, they can find it. Unfortunately, I don't have Instagram or Twitter or anything else. I've been very particular about social media because of the dangers. And,
Correct.
And so I only have Facebook.
Yes.
And I'm more than happy to meet your followers and fans.
So they can follow you.
Exactly.
Of just adding you. Ladies and gentlemen, I will leave Fale's description in the box below.
Tag me in the box below so they can find me.
And I'll do that. And,
perfect.
So thank you, Fale, for the podcast today.
Awesome.
And ladies and gentlemen, Fale Andrew Lesa. Have a good day, everybody.
Cheers.
And I'll talk to all of you later. Cheers.
Awesome.